Hi there, it's Gina Gardner here, and as usual for our genuine chats, I'm joined by my really good friend Rachel Davidson. Both of us are international best-selling authors, and neither of us are short of things to say.
That's true.
But our theme this morning is silence golden?
Mm.
And we've just been talking about two quotes which seem to be at odds with one another. One is that the only thing for evil to succeed is for good men to remain silent. And the other is,
better to be silent and thought of as foolish than to open your mouth and confirm it.
And at surface level, these things both seem to be diametrically opposed, but I don't think they are.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been a number of conversations that have come up this week where people have talked about biting their tongue, or they've talked about the fact that they felt impelled to say something.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it would be quite a good theme to explore, because I think there are times when it is absolutely right to say something, and other times when, you know what, keeping quiet is the better option. But how do you know which is which? There's the rub.
And I always think of the clever retort.
Afterwards.
It's always after the event,
Yeah.
when I would have had the perfect correction or this, that and the other of somebody who's been a bit snotty or whatever.
Yes,
Why is it always after the event? It's the universe telling you it's best to stay silent.
I think so. I mean, I think that we have two ears and one mouth for a very good reason. And I often say when I'm training, doing leadership training, we should be listening twice as much as we talk. And I think that's a pretty good rule of thumb, that you need to listen before you open your mouth very often. So I think today, to explore when are the times when we should keep quiet and when are the times that we should actually absolutely speak up. And for me, the moral imperative is that if something is hurting somebody else or the environment, or that we believe that it is morally wrong, then I do believe that we have a duty to stand up and be counted, to say, this is wrong, this should not be going on, and to do everything we can in our power to make sure that the right people hear that. Now, that's easy for me to say. I'm sitting in the middle of Arky in the UK in 2019. I'm not sitting in Nazi Germany, where if I open up my mouth and I say something, that I'm putting my life in danger. And yet there were people who spoke out, even under those incredibly difficult circumstances, because they felt it was right. And that first saying, the only thing for evil to win is for good men to stay silent, I think is never more true in times of incredible tension and danger, when people stand by and let awful things happen without saying anything.
Yeah, I was watching a film about the Holocaust the other day, actually. And one of the lines is, it's a typical sort of concentration camp film where they're showing the processing of the Jews. It's that awful phrase of processing, where we know what that means. But one of the Germans, who isn't actually a soldier, but he is German, he's sort of slightly mocking the Jews. Well, yeah, he is, because he says to one character, "But just like cattle." And the Jew, who's in the concentration camp at the moment, so he's under great duress. I mean, he's not got any power in any real sense. Sort of is like, what do you mean? And he says, you never object. There are 5 guards, albeit with guns, but 5 guards and like thousands of you. And you're all just shuffling the way that you're told, because these 5 men in uniform with guns tell you. And you never speak up, and you never speak out about it. You never do anything. You're just like cattle going off to slaughter. And of course they were. But you see, it sounds like a very unfair accusation to make to somebody who is in a very dangerous position, that you should speak up, you should speak out. But it raises the point, doesn't it, that human beings, we tend not to go against the flow of the herd. We tend to respect authority, we get it drummed into us. And if the majority of the crowd is just going with it, then you will find that you will too. None of us are immune to that.
And given the circumstances, that where do they run to? You know, that somebody's pointing a gun at you, that's the ultimate control, isn't it? That in that moment, looking for other options is pretty well closed down to you, because that flight or fright mechanism kicks in.
Yeah.
So you've got so many things working against you, haven't you?
Yeah.
And I think there are times in modern day where we don't speak out because we are fearful of repercussions. But if everybody is that fearful of the repercussions, then the status quo becomes something that is immoral, wrong, and ultimately the harm to greater numbers can carry on. And I think, you know, going back to Germany in the 1930s, you could understand that there were so many conditions that were put in place that facilitated what was the most dreadful slaughter of people, and that's been repeated in other places since then. And one of the things that I want to make very, very clear from this conversation is, when we are questioning whether people could speak out, in no way are we talking about it being their fault that they were put in those situations, or that what was done to them was in any way right. Quite the opposite. How is it that in the early stages of this, that more people did not speak out when they had at least a reasonable idea that what was going on was wrong? I mean, if you think, it took so many chances before the Prime Minister of England said, this far and no further, we are now at war. But they were given chance after chance after chance. If something had been said earlier and people had stood up earlier, maybe we wouldn't have had World War II. Who knows?
And that's the point, isn't it? That our human psychology is one where we recognise that to stand outside of the apparent direction of the herd is a dangerous thing, potentially dangerous thing to do. And so it takes great bravery and courage. And that is true for the macro, you are a Jew being herded onto a railway train, being told that you're off to perform a useful job. And you've suffered so much oppression up to that point that you are now in the mental state of, you're probably thinking you're fairly powerless anyway. And it's also true of me when I sit around and hear things and have a family dynamic going on, and I sit and I stay silent. It's the same seed, it's the same,
the magnitude point in terms of the wrong may be different, but the principle is the same.
Yeah, it's the same thing inside me that makes me think, really, maybe you shouldn't say something, because maybe there'll be this that comes after it, and maybe I'm a bit fearful about that, or maybe I don't have a right to impose my opinion on somebody. Why would I? Why would they be interested? It's the same. It comes from the same particular area.
I mean, I'd like to now sort of put it into a modern day context, and the context of work. And one of the things that, when I'm working with on leadership programs, for example, one of the biggest issues is that people are not clear about their expectations. And then when people do not do what they want, a very common pattern is to say nothing because you don't want to upset them, or you don't want to rock the boat, or you don't want to be seen to be difficult. And then you don't say anything, and it gets more and more irritating. And then there's an explosion, and the person goes, what? You've not said anything. Yeah, I've been doing this for the last umpty-ump months. Where if there'd been clear expectations from the outset, and then when people were not doing what was required, had said, do you remember the expectation we set? That's not it. What we need from you is something different. Then you get a very different scenario, very different reaction. That people have an understanding of what's expected of them when they're meeting it and when they're not. And all sorts of difficulty and stress and problems are avoided. But people think if I say something that I'll upset people, or I will be unpopular or whatever. And I think it's much more about how, when and what you say rather than when you say nothing. In the same way that very often people won't say that they're unhappy. They expect other people to recognise the signs, the huffing and the puffing and the banging about, rather than just saying, when this happens, it makes me feel this way. Or I don't like it when you behave in that way, because I'd be very grateful if you could behave in this way, and give that other person the opportunity. But they say nothing. They stay silent. Now, on the other hand, people are very free with their opinion. I suppose one could argue that we're being very free with our opinions today, as always. But the people who will criticise, who will be judgmental, who will consistently think that they are right and other people are wrong.
You always know that you're going to have, like, inverted commas, interesting conversation with somebody who will introduce themselves as, I speak as I find, or, you know, people have to take me or like leave me, and then you think, oh lordy.
It's interesting because you almost went into a northern accent then. And I'm reminded of when I was first
my northern heritage.
I was first the head or principal, and I was persona non gratis with the acting deputy head, because I was appointed initially as the deputy, who had been told not to apply for the job because they were going to appoint a man, and they appointed me, and so she was very, very cross, as you can understand. Now, she always used to be incredibly judgmental and critical, which is actually one of the reasons why the then principal head said don't apply. And he had not spoken out and said to her, I'm not, please don't apply because you're not going to get the job because of the way in which you are interacting with people. Instead, took the easy way out and said, don't apply because I'm intending appointing a man. Yes.
Those were the days when you could say those things.
Yes, it was a long time ago, and it wasn't illegal, or it may have been illegal, but he didn't take any notice anyway. But instead of tackling the underlying problem, which is this is a lady who had many good points, but one of the challenges is that she talked, I'm a blunt northerner and I say what I think. Now she used that, and I'm a northerner, believe it or not. Elocution lessons meant that my accent.
As am I.
As am you. But she used that to hide behind when she was being very critical, very judgmental, actually very unkind. You know, she talked about calling a spade a bloody shovel. Well, actually, she was using that as an opportunity, because I believe that she had a poor sense of self-worth, to make herself feel better by making other people cry. And she did it very effectively. And nobody said anything. Now, I made the decision very early.
Like a bully.
She does sound like a bully because she was a bully. And I made a decision very early on in my career with her that if she was bullying me, I'd say nothing. However, if she was doing it to other people, then I would say. Now, we could have a conversation about why I decided to say nothing in terms of me. And part of that was I needed to make a relationship with this person. And it took me 5 years, but I did it. And in fact, in the end, she came and apologised and said thank you. But it was this lady, particularly as I was very inexperienced, I was in tears more nights than I'd care to remember, because this woman was such hard work. But I felt my job was to protect other staff and
Mhm.
children and parents at times from her tongue, which was at times caustic to the point of being damaging.
Mm.
And I would go and I would tackle her and say, that is not acceptable. You know, talking in that way, behaving in that way is not acceptable, and you will be, you know, there will be consequences if you carry on. What she became was more subtle about it, but just as unkind. So it was more difficult to challenge, but I was determined to challenge it. And I'm grateful to her, because out of her and dealing with her, I learned a really important lesson, which is if something is wrong, you need to tackle it, and you need to be very clear about tackling it. Using euphemisms like, it's not very nice, or it could be different, actually don't help. And I think that's what lots of people do, is that when they do decide to speak out, they talk in such general terms because they don't want to upset, that the other person is not left very clear about what the issues are. So rather than saying, when you do this, that's unacceptable, people get left with this impression, well, they're going on a bit, but I don't know what about. And I think parents are past masters at this, and kids need to be very clear, black and white, in terms of what's acceptable and what's not, is very often easier for people to deal with and take on board than, you know, bosses who say that's not good enough, but don't say what they want, leave people feeling like I don't know what to do. So, you know, it's a very complex subject. You know, there are times when silence is absolutely golden. How many people do you know who have to have the last word and have to be right?
I think everybody is like that at some point, aren't they?
But
depends what you're arguing about and how sort of, you know, entrenched and impassioned you are about it, I think.
But some people create an art form out of it.
Yes.
And they have to be right. It's, I believe, because they feel insecure about themselves. And so this need to be right, you know, in the 15 commitments of conscious leadership, they talk about, if you are always having to be right, then you are operating below the line.
Yes.
For me, if you're an enlightened leader, then, you know, it's not about being right or wrong, unless you happen to be a pilot or a brain surgeon. You know, there are times when there are absolutes in terms of right or wrong. But most of the time, it's opinion, isn't it? My opinion is, and why should my opinion be any better or worse than yours?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so if you are absolutely determined to get the last word, I would suggest that you have to ask yourself the question, why is that so important to you? And the last word does not necessarily mean verbalizing a recognizable word. It can be flouncing out of the room and slamming the door. You know, that's having with the last word too.
You know, I think it's really quite important, actually, especially for the female of the species, to learn to be able to state assertively what is acceptable and what isn't. Because I think little girls still, even in modern times, are part of some social conditioning that's sort of saying, you know, it's not nice to get angry, it's not nice to speak up, it's, you know, you are praised for being subservient in that sense. And I mean, I know this to be true in my experience of motherhood, when I have had other parents approach me with an axe to grind, usually because my daughter and their daughter have had the usual sort of childhood spats, and then the parents get involved. And I've had angry mothers knocking on my car door once. I don't want to make it sound like it happens on a weekly basis, but and making an accusation against my daughter that was completely unfounded, completely. And I'm not great with conflict. I've been brought up in a family that hates conflict. I mean, hates conflict. So my mother was subjected to that fairly recently, actually, in her life, in that a particular delightful gentleman decided to approach her and tell her exactly what he thought of me, and accused me of doing things that were unfounded. And my mum took it. She nodded politely and said, "Oh, right, okay. Yes, okay," and then reported this to me. I don't blame her. I mean, it's slightly disappointing, but I don't blame her. I understand why she wasn't able to act. But actually, it's quite useful for me to be on the end of that, staying silent, when it didn't feel so good that she'd stayed silent, to when this woman knocked on my window and gave me a load of about my daughter. And it went through my head. Am I going to just sit and nod and take this? And the answer was, no, I'm not. And I didn't have to get aggressive. She was clearly sort of on the point of agitation. So I just simply asked her a few very pointed questions about what evidence did she have, and these accusations that she was making against my daughter. Was that who she was referring to when she put some particularly choice comments on social media herself? At which point she scuttled away. Saying, "Oh, I'm very busy now," which I leaned out the window and said, "Yes, I'm sure you are." But it really spoke to me that I do not want my daughter hearing that accusations have been made against her and her mother didn't defend her. I'm not saying that I will defend my daughter no matter what, because I understand she's not perfect. None of us are. But I am very determined that if somebody comes to me and is making accusations and unfairness and unfounded, then I will not be the kind of mother who will sort of just hope that it goes away. I will stand firm, and I will make sure that other people understand that it's not happening. They cannot come and make accusations without there being some truth in it. In which case I'm quite happy to hear, and I'm very happy to correct my daughter. And I feel that's really important for her to know that it's possible for a woman to stand and fight back. There was another incident where I was out walking with my mum, my two children. They were very young at this stage, and our dogs at that. And a man, middle-aged man, came along with his pack of dogs, and there was a bit of contretemps between the dogs. Only sort of dog talk, nothing, no bite, no blood. And he went off into one, swearing and cussing and threatening. And again, I went into this very sort of, am I going to take this? You know, he's obviously picking on us because he thinks we're vulnerable. Two women out with two young children. He thinks he can just get away with that behaviour. Am I going to take it? So once I'd secured the dog and understood that, there was not going to be any other silliness, and he was still ranting at me, I turned around and I gave as good as I got. I then had to, having finished my tirade, turn around to my children and say, "Now, Mummy's used some naughty words there, which you're not allowed to use." But I did for a very special reason. And it frightened him off because he wasn't expecting it.
Yeah.
And I was aware when I was doing it that it was a risky thing to do. But there was a definite moment in me, without any red mist, but there was a definite moment of, no more. This is not happening, and I will not stand and have that said to me, have the threats about me to me and my children made by this silly twit bonce. And if he comes at me, I'm going to be prepared to fight. And having made that commitment, I then followed through on it. And he did. He scuttled off and obviously felt slightly ashamed with himself in the moment because of his body language and what he then further went on to say. But again, I'm not very proud of the fact that I had to do that, because it would have been great to just have a dog walk without being accosted. But I am quite proud of the fact that my children didn't see me cower and scuttle away, that they saw me stand firm and shout back. And I would much rather that they learn that lesson in life than stay silent and don't say anything.
I think that's a really interesting lesson For most of us, I think one of the issues is, how do you deal with, rather than confrontation, how do you confront the issue? And for me, there's a big difference between having to deal with a confrontation in the moment, as you were then, and for most people who decide that they will not confront an issue because they don't want a situation where there's confrontation. And I think that what I would say, there are times when, yes, you've got to stand up and be counted, and you've got to say, this is not right. But you talked about the red mist didn't come. And I think that's really important. And I would always talk about, don't deal with things when you are in the height of an emotional charge that you don't have any control over, because you're likely to say or do things that you'll regret later. You need to be in control of yourself, because then you have the capacity to decide, what am I going to say, how am I going to say it, how am I going to present myself. And I would always say that if you're in the work context or in the parent context, your family, where get yourself under control before you start dealing with confronting the issue, because otherwise it does become confrontational. You sparked something for that guy where he did see the redness and he was out of control.
Yeah, he was.
And for many people, it doesn't take much. You light the blue touch paper and you stand back and there's this great big to-do. Learning to manage, to take radical responsibility for your own emotional state, I think is incredibly important. Because then when you do choose to say something, you have the capacity to choose what you're going to say, how you're going to say it, when you're going to say it. If you do it when you haven't got control of yourself emotionally, then the chances are there's going to be this torrent that comes out of your mouth, rather than like with that guy, that is neither appropriate nor measured. And actually, that's when lots of damage is done.
But in the samurai world, I'm going to mangle it, they have a concept of training hard, understanding the reality of what it is to be in battle and to fight with skill. And they do that with the single purpose of never having to do it. Because, and you see this in the natural world with animals who have a dance like of threats towards one another. It is in standing firm and having the energy of warrior when needed that will often even stop the whole thing even
Absolutely.
happening.
It comes from self-confidence, doesn't it? It comes from this sense of, I am a sentient being who have the capacity to fight, but I choose not to. I choose to show myself being assertive, but I don't need to be aggressive.
Yeah, and just to sort of the other point about that samurai mindset is that they have a resolute acceptance of death.
Yes.
So everybody, I mean, you hear that phrase and you think, oh, that sounds awful. But in actual fact, it's extremely liberating.
Because I say freedom, isn't it? If you're not frightened of dying, then you have absolute freedom to live every moment of your life to the full.
Yes, and also your opponent, we are talking about conflicts, your opponent will understand that, if you have resolute acceptance of death and they don't, if they haven't done that work on themselves, then you are always going to win, because there's nothing they can do that will threaten your stance, your position.
And if we took that into a much less extreme situation, if you are not frightened of getting it wrong, if you're not in this place where I have to not only be right but seem to be right, and it's okay to not know, it's okay to say, do you know what, I don't know. Then you have the freedom to be curious and to go and find out, and to give yourself a much different opportunity to learn, don't you?
Yeah.
So we're running out of time, and what I would like to say to you, if you're watching this, have a think about how often you feel the need to say something when in reality it's not adding anything. And how often do you fail to say something because you are frightened of being seen to not fit in, that you don't want to upset the apple cart, that you're prepared to go along with things. And we live in a world at the moment where I think we're on the cusp. There are too many people who are not standing up and saying enough. You look at the fires in Brazil at the moment, you look at the posturing that's going on with politicians all around the world. And you know, the populace very often think, well, what can I do? There's only me. But actually, if a lot of me's join together and have a voices joins, then we do have the power. And I think it's really important that in this time in our history that we stand up for those things that we absolutely believe are right, so long as those are not harming other people. Because I don't want to give free rein to fundamentalists who think I'm right, therefore it's okay to damage anybody. That is not what I'm saying at all.
I try not to say, I call a spade a... It doesn't make you sound great.
No, it doesn't. So thank you very much for joining us today. As always, we really appreciate that. Please do go to the Facebook Genuinely You group and leave your comments and let us know what you think, or go to the website, which is https /genuinely-you.com, and you can leave your comments there, and we would love to know the sort of things that you find difficult to speak about, and when you feel that you have spoken, perhaps you would rather you hadn't, but also if there are any themes that you'd like to cover in future conversations. Now, both of us use words a lot. We speak a lot and we write a lot. You'll find the point of him and the truth of me. The point of me and the truth of her. Sorry, Rachel's two novels. They are on Amazon and also on my website. You'll find all my books, including the latest Happiness 7-Day Challenge, including a 30-day journal. You'll find that on the website, and Thriving Not Surviving, the 5 Secret Pathways to Happiness, Success and Fulfillment. So we'll see you next time. Take care, be safe, lots of love. Bye-bye.